she reminded me that she wouldn't marry me until we argued. And so we were dating. We were dating for 3 or 4 months, and we were in her bedroom, sitting on the floor, doing nothing. The door was open. We're just talking and looking at photo albums is actually what we were doing. And I just looked at her and I said, "Do you think we're going to get married?" And she said, "Yeah." She goes, "But I won't marry you until we argue." And I looked at her like, maybe I should retract my question. Like, well, I don't even understand. She's like, "I don't know if you're psycho. I don't know if you know how to communicate. I don't know if you've got this radical bad temper." And I remember thinking like, okay, that makes sense. And she's like, "So I'm not going to marry you until we or agree until we go through something like that." And well, about a week or so later, I'm walking her back to her apartment, and it's really dark, and we're passing the pool area, and we're on this pathway, and all of a sudden, I pretend like I see something coming out of the shadows. And so I jump back, whoa, 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 and she just leaps out of her skin, and I start laughing, and she looks at me, she hits me, says some things I can't say in church, and she just took off running to her apartment. And then I said, all kidding aside, "Will you marry me now?" She did say yes. She did say yes. Conflict, oh my gosh, it is just such a part of relationships in general. It's such a part of our marriage union. And this is something that Max Lucado said years ago. And there we go. And it says this: conflict is inevitable, combat is optional. Nobody told me that. Like Mickey, nobody shared that little bit of wisdom with me. I didn't know. I figured if there's conflict, we're going to have some combat, we'll get through it, the dust will settle, and then off we go. But conflict, it doesn't have to turn into World War III, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. It doesn't have to turn into that. It can be a disagreement. Like, how many of you ever argued about the dumbest things? Like, dumb. Like, are we really arguing about this? Tiffany and I, when we first got married, we argued how to load a dishwasher. I did the dishes, and I put them in there, and I go out, and all of a sudden I hear this clanking around, and I walk in, and her back is to me. I'm like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "You loaded the dishwasher wrong." I'm like, "Oh, really? Wrong. Like, how? Did I put like the forks where the cups go and the cups where the utensils go?" She's like, "No, it's just wrong." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean wrong? What rule did I break?" And she's like, "You loaded it from the front to the back. You got to load it from the back to the front." And I said, "Are you kidding me?" I go, "It doesn't matter how you load it as long as it gets loaded." And she's like, "No, you've got to go from the back to the front, not from the front to the back." How many of you, by a show of hands, agree with her right now? Okay, all right. How many of you load it from the front to the back? How many of you don't care? It doesn't matter, Tiff. Been trying to tell her that for 30 years. Thank you. You just gave me some weight behind my argument. We argue about the dumbest thing. I kid you not. I think it was the next day I come back into the kitchen. She's in there, angry. And I'm like, what's wrong? You could just sense it. And she's like, "You didn't scour the sink." And I went, "Didn't scour the sink?" She's like, "Yeah, every time you clean up the kitchen, you have to scour the sink." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" She's like, "No." And I said, "Knock yourself out, because that ain't happening." How many of you believe that you have to scour the sink every time, Deborah? Oh, wow, this is going to be a longer session. Okay, you got people in the back. Marriage is hard, and we argue about the dumbest thing, don't we? We have different personalities. We process different. We think different. We were actually even trained differently. Growing up, how you were brought up versus how they were brought up can be completely different. Or if they even mirrored the same, there's still nuances that are just so different. And then top this off. We all come into it bringing our garbage. We bring in our trauma. You don't marry the person's present, you marry the person's past and present. You get all of that. And there's just conflict. It complicates relationship. In fact, look at Ecclesiastes 7:29. It says this: God made us plain and simple, but we have made ourselves very complicated. Pride, ego, childhood issues, all being brought into this union. It complicates something that is meant to be so beautiful. And what happens? We often get trapped in this cycle right here. This cycle. I think we've all been here before. There's an issue, right? So we got an issue, and then someone is triggered. Someone is triggered, and then it gets escalated, and then I've put in there pseudo-resolution. How many of you have had arguments? You don't have to raise your hand or anything. And it's resolved, but it really wasn't resolved. Is anybody? Okay, I heard a little, Okay, so I'm assuming that's a yes. Yeah, where it's kind of like you have a problem, you get in an argument, someone's triggered, it escalates, time goes by, it could be hours, it could be even a couple of days, and after a while you're like, I don't even remember what we were arguing about. Yeah, I don't know, it's so confusing, so many things. All right, you want to move on? Move on? Okay, yeah. And then we just kind of sweep it under the rug, but we never get to the root issue. It's a pseudo-resolution. It's not really genuine, so you can avoid going into that unfortunate incident again. And we do that again. Sometimes you don't even talk. Tiffany and I have had that, where we don't even have a conversation about it. It's just, a couple days go by and she ends up asking me something and I'm like, oh, I guess, okay, we're not fighting anymore. I'm just going to go with that. And nothing's even said. And we just move on. We sweep it under the rug. We sweep it under the rug. And then what happens? There's a big bulge under that rug, right? And it gets bigger, it gets bigger, it gets bigger. And now you're emotionally tripping over it every time the slightest thing happens. So what happens is we get into this pseudo-resolution, and then we get a little bit of normality, and then all of a sudden an issue happens again, someone's triggered, it escalates, pseudo-resolution, normality, and we're just trapped in this merry-go-round of what I would probably call relational hell. And we're not growing. Today, in this session, I want to talk about how do you manage marital conflict. And I'm going to mention quite a few things. So get your writing utensil out. I believe paper doesn't forget. That's why we take notes. It helps us stick in our brain. And I want you to take this packet and do me a favor. I'll never know if you do it anyway. Don't put it in like the sleeve of your back seat of the car, and just, where was that book? I don't know. Hold on to this. You don't have to put it on your coffee table, but we're going to take a lot of notes. I don't expect for you to remember everything, but that's why we take notes. That's why we fill in the blanks so that we can go, wait, there was something about that. The Holy Spirit will reveal something, and you can go back and take a look and refresh your memory and prove your wife wrong. So it'll work. So, no, I'm kidding. So how do you manage marital conflict? And these things that I'm going to give you this morning are practical. Some, there are going to be things you just need to keep in mind, and there are going to be some things that you actually have to do. And we'll sort it all out from there. So here's the first thing. Try to factor in your differences. Fill that in. Try to factor in your differences. Do you know that there are neurological factors at play between a husband and a wife? That you weren't created, designed, wired the same way? There are natural neurological differences. And we're not even talking like when sin nature gets involved, it even exasperates issue. We're setting that off to the side right now. Pride, ego, the right to be right, all of that. We're just talking about a natural wiring difference between male, female, husband, wife. And I think if we have a little bit of understanding of these neurological differences, it's going to open the door for greater grace as you work with one another. So, 2 common complaints among couples. There's obviously a lot more than 2. We're only going to cover 2. One is the husband does it and the wife is 2. Does anybody want to guess? The wife, all right, let's just see before I click it. Husband doesn't shower. Okay. Thank you, Josh. That is not something you grew up with. So you said, listen, okay, what about men? Wife is too mean, sensitive, emotional. All right, let's just get into it. How about this? Husband doesn't pay attention. Fill that in. The husband doesn't pay attention. We hear that so many times. He just doesn't pay attention. Did you know that there's a neurological reason, not for all of it, but for some of it, there is something neurological at play? Let me show you. Fill this in. Male brains utilize nearly 7 times more gray matter for activity, while female brains utilize nearly 10 times more white matter. Fill in, 7 and 10. 7 and 10. Male brains utilize nearly 7 times more gray matter for activity, while female brains utilize nearly 10 times more white matter. So what does that mean? It means this. The gray matter, it means this. Men have this in general, not every guy, but most men have this intense ability to be focused. Men are really good at getting tunnel vision. They latch on to something and they don't know what's going on around them. Wives, have you ever experienced your husband being lost like that? Yeah, okay, so good. So there's at least 5 men that are like that. So, no, the majority of men, when we get tunnel vision, we get so focused, we get hyper-focused, we just don't really think much about anything else. I mean, that's why men can, I hate to say this, they can sit there and play video games for 4 or 5 hours at a time. Not this guy, but, there's people I know, it's just like when he's playing a video game or when they're watching TV or when they're working on something, they're like, huh, what? They're just so focused. And women, guess what? You need that. You need your man at times. There's seasons and times where they have to be hyper-focused, and that's where it comes in, and it's a great strength to have. Wives are different. Wives are a lot different. Wives got, 10 times more white matter. That is the networking grid between white matter and gray matter. It's the networking grid between the two, which means this. Wives can be great multitaskers. They've got multiple things going on in their mind at the same time and can't quite figure out how it works. But that's what they could do. They're thinking about kids and work and this and that and all that. And I don't even have to interrupt Tiffany. She interrupts herself when she's talking to me. No, seriously. Well, hey, we need to go do this. Oh, wait, that reminds me about the car, and we got to get that done. Where's Goliath right now? It's our dog. Where is he? I'm like, whoa, which conversation am I having? I'm lost. Are we about Goliath right now, or are we back on the first thing? She's like, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting myself. I'm like, man, this is exhausting. I can't keep up. It is like that. Here's the reality. There was a book that came out in 2001 about men and women and differences. Something about this. Men are like waffles. Women are like spaghetti. Their brains, how they're wired. Women, your husband's a waffle. The poor sap is a waffle. He can only compartmentalize to a certain degree. Now, some men are good, and I'm joking around a little bit, but by and large, this is how we're wired. They're neurological differences. It's not because your husband is self-centered, although that could be the case sometimes. Sometimes he's just in that mode. And so when you're having a conversation and things are like he's not paying attention, just tell yourself, he's in waffle mode. He's in waffle mode. Hey, honey. You actually looked at me. No. Sorry, man. Yeah. Sorry. That threw me, we do need to just go, you know what? He's just hyper-focused. That's how he's wired. And men, when your wives are starting 8 conversations at the same time with you, or, well, what about this, what about that? And you're like, I'm still working on the first thing that you asked me. Just remember, spaghetti, that's just how they're wired. But you know what? We need our wives to be multitasking, because how many of you know things just won't get done if things aren't thought about? There's a neurological difference. Here's the second one. Fill this in. A wife is too emotional. We hear that all the time. Man, she's so emotional. What's up with these feelings? There's this thing called oxytocin. You ever hear of it? The bonding chemical, the relationship chemical. Women actually have more of oxytocin produced in their body than men do. Check this out. National Center for Biotechnology information. They measured the plasma oxytocin level. They did a study on it. And men's oxytocin plasma average was 1.53. That's the men. Fill that in. 1.53. In this study, the women's oxytocin plasma average was 4.53. That's a difference. That is a difference. Women, when you give birth, there is a surge of oxytocin that floods your body and creates such an amazing bonding with your children. That's why a mom is mama bear. You know, dads, well, you'll be okay. Rub some dirt on it. You'll be fine. And the mom is like, oh, you know. There's just this thing. When you're breastfeeding, oxytocin is being produced. It explains why women tend to be more emotional. They have this bonding chemical about them that's just there, and it's more than guys. And we haven't even talked about if there was childhood trauma that would like curb you. Like, we don't show emotion in this house. That even just throws a whole other mix in it. But naturally, women tend to be more sensitive, more emotional. They've got more oxytocin. I remember when I was a youth pastor in California, it would be like on a Tuesday, I would hear the pastor's wife, she'd make phone calls. And she'd make these phone calls and because somebody wasn't there on Sunday. And she'd be like, hey, Mary, I didn't see you on Sunday. Just wanted to give you a squeeze. And she would say it just like that. And I'm like, am I hearing that from my office? And then all of a sudden she hangs up, picks up the phone. Hi, Barbara. Oh, we missed you and Ted. Yeah, just wanted to give you a squeeze. And I literally thought, I could never do that. I could never do that. Hey, Ben, sorry I missed you, man, on Sunday. I wanted to give you a squeeze. It doesn't translate. It doesn't translate. That's her. I'm like, dudes don't do that. Oh gosh. Most dudes don't. They usually grunt. What's up? They nod. They scratch. They just, I remember it was like, with guys, you don't say, hey, how are you? Over time, it changed to, what's up, right? And then it went to, what's up? And then it went to, sup. And now they don't even say anything. They just nod. We don't use words sometimes. We're just different. Just one more to prove the point. Women, why do you all have to go to the bathroom together? It's a bonding moment. I needed to go to the restroom. Oh, you know what? I'll join you. And then they just scamper off. Dudes don't do that. I got to go to the bathroom. Kurt, you want to come? No. I knew he was going to say no. If he would have said yes, we would have added a fifth thing to a session. But foundationally, men and women are completely different in so many ways, and one of them is emotionally. Check this out. I'm going to tell you a stat. It's 13 years old. Is it 13 years old? No, 11 years old. But it's still applicable. LiveScience.com says this. A 2012 study found dads who got a boost of oxytocin via nasal spray played more closely with their 5-month-old babies than dads who didn't get the hormone zap. Women, do you want to get your hands on that nasal spray when they're sleeping? I love you too. These are just two natural design differences. And we don't think about them. We just don't. We just think you're being insensitive or you're overly sensitive or whatever. And really, there's a wiring thing going on, a neurological thing that is present. How often do we take that into account when we start to feel frustration arise in our heart? How do we manage marital conflict? Try to factor in your differences. How about this? Work on me for a better us. Work on me for a better us. Psalm 139 says this. Psalmist writes, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. See if there is any offense in me, or any offensive way in me." The psalmist is welcoming this idea that God do an audit on his heart. I don't know about you, but that makes me nervous to pray that prayer. Lord, as a husband, is there any offensive way in me that interrupts, causes friction and fraction in my marriage with Tiffany? I have a feeling that's a prayer that the Lord will answer. God always answers. Yes, no, not right now, whatever. But I just feel like if we are sincere in asking that, the Lord might start to reveal things in us that we didn't even know were there, that are actually coming out and causing tension, unnecessary tension. Some of us don't even want to pray that prayer. Like, no, that's okay. It's cool to read it in the Psalms, but not so much for me. Why? Because it's painful. It's painful sometimes to realize that you have had a deep wound in your heart, in your soul, that's actually raising its head periodically, that's causing damage to your marriage. Well, I don't want to know about it. But it keeps happening. And you may not even know that it's happening. And so it's like, well, let's just leave it. It's in the past. No, see, what happens is we all go through childhood trauma. All of us have it to some degree, in various degrees. And if it's just crazy amount, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that has happened to you. But nonetheless, there is stuff that is there that has affected the way we see life today. We see life through that lens. And we see situations and circumstances through that lens. And often it's skewed. Because we take what happens to us as a child and we try to catalog those experiences, make sense of them. And more times than not, we don't quite get it right in the making sense of it. And then something happens and boom, we're triggered. And we blow up at our spouse. Or we make a mountain out of a molehill. I remember Tiffany, she used to take these, what we called sanity breaks. We have 4 kids. Josh is the second oldest. We have 4 total. And she was a stay-at-home mom. It was something that we decided that we wanted to do for our family. And she would say, hey, I need a break. I'm like, okay. And so she's going to go hang out at her mom's house and just for the weekend and stuff. I'm like, great. So growing up, whenever my mom was gone, my dad would always say, hey, listen, your mom's on her way home, or she's going to be home tonight. We have to clean the house. I don't want her to feel punished for being gone. So we're vacuuming, we're mopping the floor, we're sweeping, we're doing the laundry, all of that stuff. And so I hated it as a kid, but now Tiffany's leaving, and now I know she's going to come back, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess we got to clean up. And so I start cleaning up, and that's what I wanted to do. And so I got everything. Kids are fed, they're alive, the dogs are okay, everything's pushed away, it looks good. And all of a sudden she comes in and I say, hey, how are you? It was good, I'm glad to be home. And also she goes to the counter and she's like, and I'm getting so pissed. I'm getting so angry. And I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, well, it's a mess. And I blew up. I'm like, oh, why don't you pick the one thing that I didn't do? Go check the laundry. It's empty. Why don't you, look, the kids are alive. They're fed. Look, like we vacuumed. Look, there's no, remember that you complained? It's gone. But we don't see any of that. We just like, oh, we didn't see papers over here. How well do you think that conversation went? Suddenly it went from, hi, honey, you're home, to, I'm going back. No, I mean, it caused friction. So we're getting counseling with Dr. Ted and Diane from Pure Desire Ministries. And this came up. And I was telling Dr. Ted, it just annoys me every time she comes home. And I'll straighten everything up that I think she's going to touch. And she'll always find something. And he's like, let me ask you something. And it was a really, really good question. He goes, I want you to pause for a moment and think back in your earliest memory of how you feel when Tiffany comes home. I want you to think back, how far can you go to when you first felt that way? And I said, my dad used to do that to me. He's like, what do you mean? My dad would go away on some business trip. He would come home. And I have 4 kids in my family. I'm the oldest. And all of a sudden, I'd hear my dad yelling in the driveway, Joey, I told you to get your bike out of the driveway. I come home, and there it is. Get it out. I'm in my bedroom, and I can hear this. And all of a sudden, I hear, Stephanie. And I'm like, oh, no, he's working his way all the way to me. And you didn't do this. And 30 seconds, Jennifer, and I'm like, oh, here it comes, Ricky, and I'm like, what? And he's like, you didn't do this. Well, he had always given me like a few things to do, but he'd always nail me for the one thing I didn't do. And Dr. Ted said, when Tiffany does that, you're reacting to somebody that's not even in the room. It's not about Tiffany. That's about an unresolved childhood issue that's being triggered at a subconscious level, but you're pinning it on her. You don't even know why you're feeling that. And I literally was like, oh my gosh, you're so right. Every time she does that, it makes me feel like I'm 12 years old again. She's not thinking that at all. She's just like, oh, I'm straightening up papers. She's not even talking to me. She doesn't have an attitude, but that's how I saw it. And so I had to work through that. I had to work on me to have a better us. So the next time she went away, yes, she came home and she found something to move, and that feeling would start to come. And I'd be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Here's the benefit of working on you and getting self-discovery. I can recognize it now and go, no, that's just me. Hi, honey, how are you? Give her a kiss. Avoid a conversation that didn't need to be had. No tension. Did that feeling start to come? It still did, because I still felt like I was 12, because I wanted to do something right, but I know my wife wasn't intentionally doing something, and I was reacting from something from childhood. Does that make sense? Sometimes we don't want to be changed. Sometimes we don't want to be changed. Folks, we have stuff in our lives and in our past that is so deep-seated, we don't even know why we respond, react, or do what we do. We just know we have an emotion to it, and we're upset. Well, I don't know why. And we think about them. And God, I believe, is challenging us today to say, will you allow me to search your heart and find some offensive way in you to make you better? But we want to resist because it's painful. We're like my son Caleb. Caleb, when he was 18 months old or something, still pooped his pants, right? And he would always go to hide. He would always go to hide. He'd be around a corner or hanging on a table, and his body would do some sort of gyration. He would be doing this. That's what he would do. And he'd be like this. And I walk around, how many of your kids, your kids, yeah, or they're squatting around the corner or whatever, like our grandson hides under his high chair. You pooping? He's just looking. Caleb, he does this, like this. And I'm like, bro, what are you doing? And he goes like this. He goes, no poo-poo, daddy, no poo-poo. Yeah, hand up, finger down, no poo-poo. And I'm like, well, it sure looks like you're trying something here. And I'm like, come here, come here. And he's like, no, daddy, no, daddy, no, daddy, no poo-poo, no poo-poo, no poo-poo, no poo-poo. And I'm like, no, buddy, I can smell it. There's poop. And he's like, no, 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 no. And he starts to cry when I pick him up. And I take him to the changing table. I lay him down, and he's just not having it. I'm like, buddy, 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 daddy has to change your diaper. You got poo-poo. No, daddy, no, daddy, no poo-poo, no poo-poo. So take it off. And I open it up, and I see his butt is blistered. It's red. It's chapped. He doesn't want me to touch it. And I said, let's get your mom. No. No, I said, hold on, hold on, hold on. And I'm like, how can I deal with poo-poo? I know it's going to be painful. I know it's going to sting. But how can I deal with it to minimize it? Because that's my heart for my son. That's the father's heart. I don't want him to be in pain. So I kind of dabbed and did the best I could. I didn't go in there full force, I was sensitive, but still had to touch, had to clean. Then I got the bag balm. You guys remember bag balm and Desitin and powder, and picked it up, and he stood up, and I gave him a hug. Would it have been loving for me to go, oh, it hurts too much? Okay, never mind. Or would it be loving to say, hey, I know this is not going to be easy, but I love you too much to allow you to sit in your own poop? Folks, some of us have poop. And God's like, I just so want to help clean, to make your relationship, your marriage union so great. It's just this issue is stinking up your marriage. And we're telling God, no poo-poo, no poo-poo, no poo-poo. And he's like, no, there is. And God lovingly, by ministry of the Holy Spirit, wants to come in with a loving salve and clean us up so that we can become the best version of ourselves, so that we can have the chance at being the best version of us. The question is, will we let him? Will we let him? How do we manage marital conflict? Try to factor in your differences. Work on me for a better us. Learn to take 3 deep breaths before responding. This is important. Learn to take 3 deep breaths. Conflict, arguments. A lot of times we react before we speak. We speak without thinking. How many of you have ever heard of the limbic system? Okay? We're in science class for a second. Limbic system, it's the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. And it is the emotional resource center for your brain. And that's where we get our fight, our flight feelings. When things are triggered, it's coming from our limbic system. And we have this part of our brain right here in the front, right behind your forehead, called the prefrontal cortex. That's where logic and reasoning comes from. Did you know that there's been studies that your logic and reasoning can lag behind up to 10 seconds to an emotion? Think about that. Have you ever didn't think before you speak? Have you ever reacted, did something out of emotion, you hadn't quite thought it through? Dr. Ted told me, he said, Rick, your limbic system and your prefrontal cortex, your limbic system is like Mike Tyson, your prefrontal cortex is like Woody Allen. Who do you think is going to win in a fight? Mike Tyson all day long. Some of you don't even know who Woody Allen is, I can tell. Google him. Josh, just Google him. A lot of damage, relational damage, can happen in those 10 seconds. So we need to take 3 deep breaths. Why? Because what happens is that it triggers neurons in your brain that tells your body it's time to relax. So let's do this together. We're going to take 3 deep breaths. You ready? All right, let's do it together. Ready? In. Out. 1. In. Out. In, out. You feel calm? There's that feeling. Your body, when we take in that oxygen like that at a deep level, it triggers neurons that tells our body it's time to relax. And so here's the thing. Deep breathing allows our prefrontal cortex, logic and reasoning, it gives it time to catch up. When Tiffany and I were going through our thing, I would call Dr. Ted, I'm freaking out, I'm being triggered, and he said, "Did you do your 3 deep breaths?" No. It's like, let's do that together over the phone. And it was like literally, I was in a better headspace. It's not weird, Eastern stuff. It's just how our body is wired. When we take in oxygen, we can think clearer. And sometimes when we're triggered by something, sometimes we need to pause for a moment and go, I need to go take 3 deep breaths. You could do it while you're going to the bathroom. You could do it while you're taking a shower. You could do it while you're driving your car. You can do it anywhere you can. You can do it at work by yourself. You don't have to make a big deal about it. You don't have to invite a whole room to do it with you. You could just do it. But what it does is it gives you a moment to avoid putting your foot in your mouth. Because after you take these 3 deep breaths, you can go, what is the best way I could respond to not exasperate this situation? Versus if that happens, you're triggered and you just go. Look at what it says. Proverbs 13:16. It says, wise people think before they act. Breathing before acting out is wise. It's a very practical, small thing we can do, but what it can do is give you a moment. Actually, you know what? So not in my notes, but I'm going to take advantage of the time and do it. What time is it? Okay, yeah. This happened this week. Okay? This happened this week. This week. Tiffany and I were rushing to get out of the house at the same time. You're laughing already, Tip. And she's like running around. She's getting things. We're in the kitchen. I'm literally just poured myself a fresh bowl of frosted mini wheats. And how many of you don't like soggy cereal? Like, I want to eat it when it's cold. And so I'm eating it, and she's back there. And I've got to leave in literally 5 minutes. She's got to leave in 5 minutes. And I looked at this bag that she had that was by my cereal bowl. And I looked at it, and I was like, what does that say? And I just tilted it back. I was like, oh. And I read the label on it, put it back, started eating my cereal, and all of a sudden, I hear, oh my gosh. I'm like, what? Her coffee cup was right behind the bag, and I didn't see it. Poof. Now you got coffee everywhere. I so wish I had coffee everywhere. It wasn't everywhere. It dumped 100% into her purse. My purse! And I'm like, what? What's going on? And in my mind, I literally thought, shouldn't have had your coffee cup there. And I'm literally like, and I went, take a breath, take a breath. You've got to leave in 5 minutes. It's in her purse. And she's just, taking everything out. And I'm like, okay, what do we do? What do we do? And she's like, you need to wash it out. And I'm like, can you just throw this in the washing machine? No, this isn't washable, this purse. You have to wipe it out. I'm like, well, do I have to do it now? And it's just like, just shut up and just do it. And we're pulling everything out. And she doesn't even have a purse. It's a junk bag. It's like all these like lip glosses. They're like, how many do you need? Yeah. Oh, no. Please take that from her. Thank you, Louise, for turning off her mic. But there was that moment where I was trying to justify myself. Like, what are you mad at me? And it was an accident, but we're tense because we were already late. And just took a deep breath. I'm like, wow. And now we text each other. I said, aren't we growing? We're maturing. I kid you not, I can show you the text. How do we manage marital conflict? Learn to take 3 deep breaths. It just gives your prefrontal cortex time to catch up to your emotion so we don't make a mistake. Something very simple, yet very practical. How about this one? Fill this in. Number 4, learn to identify unspoken rules. Learn to identify unspoken rules. Now, SYMBIS, Doctors Les and Leslie Parrott, they wrote a book, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. That's what SYMBIS stands for. And 17 years into our marriage, Tiffany and I read it, and we came across this idea of unspoken rules. And we were like, why didn't we know about this? Why are we 17 years into our marriage and we had never heard about this? You know how many fights we could have not had? And what an unspoken rule is, it's this. And I know we can all relate to this. Each of us has an internal conviction about how something should be done at home or in life, how Christmas morning should be done, how the morning should go on just every day, how banking should happen, how we should budget this, or how do we plan vacation. We all have this idea of, and it's this conviction in us, this is how it needs to be done. It's an unspoken rule. It's like the conviction is so strong, it's as if it's a rule in your heart, and it's unspoken because you haven't shared it with your spouse. So what happens is that your spouse does something the opposite of what you think it should be done, and they feel like that you're violating a rule, and so they get angry. It's an unspoken rule. They don't even know it's a rule. They don't even know that they're breaking this conviction that you have. And so what happens is it's like then there's a reaction that's like, what are you doing? No, that's not how we do that. You got to do it this way. It's like, oh my gosh, well, okay, whatever. And we don't know what to do. And it's like, whoa. There's something there. Why do you feel so strongly about a task being done a certain way? You never unpacked that for me, so I don't know. Back to scouring the sink. Remember that? She's scouring the sink. She's like, you got to scour the sink every day. And I'm like, or every time you clean the kitchen, I'm like, oh, knock yourself out. 17 years later, comes up to me. I'm sorry I yelled at you for scouring the sink. I'm like, why? She's like, I just realized that was an unspoken rule. Okay, talk to me about that. What are you talking about? She's like, growing up, that was a rule in our family. My dad said, every time you clean the kitchen, you have to scour the sink. You didn't grow up in our family. You don't carry that same conviction. But I treated you as if you did, and you were being lazy, and that was wrong. Do you see how that's an unspoken rule? I had no clue where that was coming from. And so Tiffany and I, what we would do in those moments is, if one of us feels very strongly that something needs to be done a certain way, we'll back up and go, ask the question, why do we feel so strongly about this? Because every time our spouse does the opposite, we get upset. And so now we go, I think we're having an unspoken rule moment. I'm like, are we really? Okay, cool. I'm not in trouble. What's going on? And she's like, no, because you were wanting this. Where did that come from? I'm like, that's what my dad used to always say. She's like, I never knew that. I'm like, oh, so now I don't have to be mad at you anymore for like not doing it. And it's wonderful because now it's like a joke. I think we're having an unspoken rule, and we both just back up and go, okay, let's look at it. But here's the thing. Doing that, it's all part of Scripture, this backing up, identifying that there's an unspoken rule. Maybe you have a conviction, it was the way you were raised. Please clue me in on it so we can kind of figure out how we're going to move forward. This is all part of leaving in what? Thank you. Leaving and cleaving. Look at what it says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become flesh. The discovery of an unspoken rule provides an opportunity for us to leave and cleave, creating a new way, a new rule that is based on our commitment to our spouse. Just because you did it the way you did it as a kid doesn't mean you have to continue doing it that way as an adult. It's okay to change things up. Yes, you're going to still have your mom and dad in the back of your mind, but you go, I'm leaving and cleaving. My devotion is to my spouse. I guess we could do Christmas morning however we want to do Christmas morning. And let me just tell you, when you can identify when unspoken rules are kind of taking place, it just eliminates a ton of aggro and a ton of arguing and creates something new and fresh, and you decide, okay, that's how we're going to do it, and you celebrate that. Be sensitive to when that might be happening. How do you manage marital conflict? Identify unspoken rules. Here's the fifth thing. Create rules and guidelines for communication. This is going to save so much aggravation if you can create rules of when to communicate. Proverbs 15:23. Oh, I went backwards, my bad. Where am I at? Oh, yeah, I'm right. Agree on a time, fill this in. Agree on a time when to have a conversation. How many of you know sometimes you're trying to have a conversation and it's just not the right time, but you're in that zone, you're stuck. Look at what it says in Proverbs chapter 15, verse 23. It says, a man finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good is a timely word. Timing is important, is it not? Sometimes we start conversations and it's just not the right time. And it's like, then we're surprised that we're in an argument. You know, Tiffany, when we were in our earlier years, we kind of had to sit down. And I said, when I come home from work, I'm not ready to download. I need 15 minutes. And so we were like, okay. And so we just kind of created this rule. Just give some space, because I want to be in the conversation. Fill this in. Agree on a time when not to have a conversation. When to have it, when not to have it. I am not a morning person. How many of you are not morning persons? Raise your hand. Okay, yeah. So if you have to hear data and to-do lists, how good and successful are you at retaining that? Yeah, and I used to tell her, honey, it's just too much information, too much. And even today, she'll come in and she'll go, hey, we got to do this. And I'll be like, I'll look at her and she's like, too soon. I'm like, I love you, but yeah, too soon. I'm sorry, I'm just not there yet. For Tiffany, it's at the end of her day at 5 p.m. I've been thinking about things. Hey, I want to talk to you about this. And she's like, my brain is mush. Can we not do this? So we had to learn when not to have conversations. It saves us from aggravation. How about this? Agree on a time when to stop having a conversation. When to stop having one. Write these numbers: 3, 30, and then 3. This is just a rule of thumb that we do. You could change it however you want. But Tiffany and I, through counseling, we learned that there's this 3, 30, 3. 3 minutes, 30 minutes, 3 hours. Both of us have an opportunity, and it has to be respected. We agreed on it. If one of us goes, you know what, I need 3 minutes before we have this conversation. Because sometimes you're in the middle of something and you just kind of have to finish a thought and then come back. Or you're in the middle of it and you're realizing, whoa, I have to shift gears in my head. So we would call a 3-minute timeout. 3 minutes, just 3 minutes? Okay, great. All right. And then we respect that. It's not like 2 hours later, okay, all right, what's going on? And so we'll talk. Sometimes we need 30 minutes. It could be for whatever reason, but I need 30 minutes so I can get my head right into what we're going to be talking about. Sometimes we're talking, and it's just, you can feel it expanding, and it's getting edgy, and we'll just go, we need a 30-minute timeout. Because we know if we keep going down this road, it is not going to go well. So we'll have to back up 30 minutes, and we'll go do whatever just to kind of breathe. And then we'll come back. And then we do 3 hours. Sometimes 3 hours just basically represents, let's chat tonight. This is not the time. Or maybe it's a lot to process. Maybe you might need to go have another conversation with a trusted third-party member or a friend or whoever that could speak into the situation, and you say, look, can we talk about this tonight, basically in 3 hours or whatever. It could be 5. But the point is you still come. And during that 3-hour period or whatever, you're working on getting into that good headspace. And it just saves a lot of fighting because you're giving each other space because you want to be the best you can be for the conversation. I know limbically we want to just win the conversation. But that's where we have to exercise discipline and go, do I want this to go well? How important is it for me to win this conversation, or how important is it for us to be on the same page and win together? Sometimes it's how you have a conversation. You follow a method, fill this in, follow a method of how you will communicate when at odds. In your booklet, there's something called the Gottman. If you can go ahead and turn there real quick. And I'm going to ask that Tiffany would grab the microphone. The Gottman is a communication tool that we've used for the last, off and on, for the last 10 years. Thank you, Josh. I've trained you well. So, we're going to look at the Gottman. So the Gottman is a communication tool that we use when we're at odds and we just can't get on the same page. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like every single time we come to talk about this, it's just disaster? We can't seem to agree. And so Dr. Ted and Diane, through our counseling, they're like, we're going to teach you a communication tool that if you follow it, it will bring you to a resolution, and you won't hate each other either. You'll actually feel heard and respected. And we're like, all right, this has got to be magic or something, because we've never had this success before. And so they walked us through a scenario, a disagreement that we went through. And at the end of it, we were like, wow, that actually kind of worked. Mm-hmm. And we've used this on our kids.
Yes.
Yeah, like they couldn't get on the same page. Grab the Gottman. Oh, the stupid Gottman.
They weren't happy, but after we made them do it, it worked. And Rick has made employees.
Yeah, there was a manager and a receptionist that were at each other's throats. And I was like, come in the conference room. I printed it out. I said, here you go. I go, this is going to feel weird, but trust me. And at the end, I remember one of them goes, wow, that was kind of like therapy, you know? and they were fine after that. They just had not thought like how to communicate just so that they can get on the same page. And I know we as husbands and wives, we can totally feel that way, correct?
Well, and when they printed it out and gave it to us, it was really weird.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It feels weird to like sit with a piece of paper and say, I feel defensive. I feel, but if you walk through it, mm-hmm. It really does work. And you know what? It's been
10 years.
10 years. And we still have to print it out because we can't remember, everything. But it really does work.
It does work. So it's a communication tool that I would encourage you to have readily accessible. Put it on your phone, take a picture of it, whatever. Mm-hmm. And it does feel mechanical, but it does help. And so what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a live scenario with you concerning an issue we had to use the Gottman on. And would you like to share?
I would really like to share about what happened, about what Rick did wrong.
Let's just go. No.
So this is what happened. And this didn't, we'll be honest with you, this didn't just happen, but this is an argument that we did have, and yeah, we had to do the Gottman. So it was, when was it? I think it
It was
was,
right before Caleb got
so
married.
August.
Yeah.
It was August. I was growing things. I like to grow things. Tomatoes, cucumbers, flowers, stuff like that. And we were at the point in my tomato growth that they were really tall, and one of my tomato plants had a cage on it and one didn't.